I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Mouse, welcome back to All Things Unexplained. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet and you feel so inclined, we would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. That way you never miss anything that we put out there. It got wild at the end of Understanding UAP Part 1 with Eric Davis when he literally told Burleson and Burchett in front of Avi Loeb, Tim Gallaudet, and Lou Elizondo about the various species of aliens, including that it was 4-foot grays that crashed at Roswell. Whoosh, that's right. At an oversight committee, 2 lawmakers, scientist Eric Davis told everybody that the Roswell incident, yeah, that was 4-foot tall gray aliens. Well, where did they go? Where are they? Maybe we'll find out in part 2, but let's jump right in to part 2. Thanks to all those around the world that joined me for part 1. Let's see what we've got in store for part 2.
And we're they're great. All right, folks, we can shut that door. We're going to get rolling here. I want to be cognizant of the representative's time. All right, folks. The next part of this panelist discussion will involve national security. Before we begin, I would like to share something with you that has not been planned, and I just received permission to share this with you this morning. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you now is because I think it's important and relevant to this next conversation with these 2 individuals who I'll introduce to you in a minute. Very relevant to this conversation. We talk about national security a lot, and our pilots and our men and women in uniform are able to fight wars for us, combat. But there's a whole sector out there that we also have to be cognizant of, and that's our commercial pilots and civilian pilots. And I'm going to share with you a photograph that has never been made public. It was taken in 2021 over the Four Corners region at an altitude of approximately 21,000 feet by a private pilot outside of his aircraft. And this is a photo. I'll give a copy for Congress to see. It was taken by we have all the information on the camera, and I just received permission today to share this with you. It is a lenticular object, and when you look at the shadow being cast, it is significantly large. This is an altitude of 21,000 feet. Taken by a civilian pilot. Now, why is this important? when you're finished as well, please pass on down to them. This is taken from a civilian pilot, right? Not a FLIR system, not an infrared system, but an average person with an average camera at 21,000 feet. And the object potentially is anywhere between 600 to 1,000 feet in diameter. This is a particular object, and it is silver. Now, I cannot vouch for the veracity of this photograph. I didn't take it. But this is an example of one of many, many, many incidents involving commercial and private pilots. And guess what? They don't know where to report it. Guess what? Congress has no idea that this is happening on a regular basis. That's a problem. And why is this relevant? Because right now you're going to hear from two speakers. I'll introduce you to them in a moment, who are experts in national security and have been following this topic for some time. What I'd like to do is introduce you to Mr. Chris Mellon, first and foremost. Chris Mellon is I call him a former boss's 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 boss. He was a senior staff director, if I'm not mistaken, here in the Senate at the time with Bill Cohen, Senator Bill Cohen, and then later went to the Department of Defense and became the first, what you might call the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The position before there was a DASD, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, where basically Chris was responsible for all the intelligence equities globally for the Department of Defense, right? Anything from human operations to special access programs and everything else. Chris has been a spearhead in public engagement, getting the academic community, the scientific community, everybody, intelligence community, all to apply their efforts and time and talent and resources to this very real problem. The next individual is Mr. Kirk McConnell, former senior military officer as well, and very senior staffer on the Senate side for the Senate Armed Services Committee, who was instrumental in helping get Dr. Eric Davis to provide classified briefings to certain members of Congress. I won't say who, that's not my place to say. Kirk has been in the shadows for a very long time, and he has been extremely effective in getting this topic at the highest, to the attention of the highest levels of our government. And that to include other administrations as well, not just this one and the one before, but the one before that as well. So with that said, there's a whole lot more to go in. I could spend probably half an hour going over their academic week today and their accomplishments. But rather what I'd like to do is spend some of that time instead and allowing them to have a discussion with you here today. And some questions. I think Chris Mellon first has a presentation he'd like to provide. So I'm going to give the floor to Chris Mellon. Please welcome our new panel.
Yeah, maybe I'll come up there. Project a little better. Thank you, Lou, for that overly kind introduction. And my thanks to the congressmen for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here with us, and everyone else who contributed, especially Jordan Flowers. I just returned from South America for about 4 weeks, and promised I would not work on anything related to UAP the whole time. And got back here and made a quick turn, a little under the weather. Wouldn't have a briefing if it wasn't for Jordan and his assistants. What I want to talk about is I don't think the public is aware of the extent of our airspace vulnerabilities and failures and the degree to which they've already been exploited and are being exploited today, and the challenge that we face in trying to sort this out. I also want to pivot a little bit based on earlier conversations. I wasn't going to get into this so much, but Dr. Lowe talked about spending $1 billion or so to develop new sensors to collect information. One of my career frustrations in the intelligence community has been that we have incredible sensors that are far more than $1 billion, and we have a great many of them. And they are collecting information today which is directly pertinent to this topic. But that information is not reaching Congress, it's not reaching the scientific community. In many cases, I don't think it's reaching ARROW, which is the office that Congress established to study and evaluate this phenomenon. So if we could have the first slide, please. Was this going to do that for me? Yeah, so here's just a little overview of topics I'm going to touch on, which is the word shocking, I think, is not an exaggeration or hyperbole in this case. We really are effectively naked from an air defense standpoint when it comes to these drones. I'll talk and provide very specific examples to illustrate that, and the UAP. Let me begin here. Okay, this is unfortunately I don't have this right in front of me, but this is a map that displays roughly the coverage provided by something called the solid state phased array radar system. These are reportedly the most powerful emitters on the planet. If there are other civilizations in nearby solar systems, they're more likely to detect these emitters than probably anything else on our planet. How many UAP would you guess they have detected in, say, the last 20 years that have been reported to ARROW? Zero. How is it possible that the most powerful radar, I've been writing about this for years, by the way, fecklessly. This is not a new fight. I've been trying to get Congress, somebody in Congress to listen to this and pay attention for years. Kirk will testify to that in your observances committee, because I keep going up there and had them for years saying, guys, how come this thing never detects any UAP? How is that possible? These are the most powerful emitters on the planet. And look at the area they cover. And oh, by the way, when you look at the area they cover, we keep having reports over and over again from tactical systems, from ships, plane, and aircraft in the areas covered by these radar. So Aegis ships, planes flown by Mr. Ryan here and his naval aviator colleagues and others are reporting UAP constantly in these areas, but somehow these systems never seem to see a UAP ever. How is that possible? And how come nobody's asking about that? Is this a Chinese balloon situation where all we need to do is tweak the filters, and lo and behold, we're going to bring into focus something which is, drones, if nothing else, they're a vital, absolutely vital air security significance. We know that in Russia and Ukraine today, drones are causing more casualties and killing more people than any other weapon system, right? So this is utterly transformed warfare as we know it. Here's a multi-billion-dollar system. It's up and running. This is the successor to the old ballistic missile early warning system. So its primary function is to detect ballistic missiles coming over the poles from Russia or China or from North Korea and to develop intercept solutions. But it also has a mission of detecting sea-launched cruise missiles and bombers and so forth. So there's one of several possibilities. Either we've spent billions of dollars on a system that's not performing as it should be, or it just, maybe needs some tweaks in the filters to expand the range of things it reports on. One of the challenges with these systems is to avoid clutter, right? Because they're so powerful, they collect so much, they've got to filter it down so what's being displayed is reasonable and appropriate to the mission. It could be a problem of that sort, or it's simply is so highly classified that the information is not reaching Arrow. I favor the latter. I think that's what's going on. And I think if Congress were to poke hard on this, maybe get an inspector general to look at these possible options, or otherwise look into this, they would get some answers.
Quick question. Is that data from that system being archived?
I believe so. I don't know how far back they go and how that's a great question. I don't know how far back it goes. And one of the things, so when you approach NORAD about this with the Air Force, and you start asking about this data and what are they seeing? So right now, my understanding is, by the way, that they don't even tell Aero, whose director is supposedly cleared for everything, they don't even tell him when they scramble fighter aircraft to conduct intercepts. So they're regularly scrambling fighter aircraft. I've talked to and interviewed on television a NORAD officer who told an account of walking into Cheyenne Mountain where he, for duty, and everybody was standing on their feet looking at the big screen. And there was a UAP coming down from the Arctic along the east coast of the United States. And the commander-in-chief of NORAD said, quote, "I want that thing." And everybody said, "Yes, sir." And they were launching everything we had on the East Coast. Couldn't get it near it, couldn't get a radar lock. It disappeared out over the southern Atlantic. Is that the only time that ever happened? The one time that this NORAD officer gave this account from the 1990s, when the system was much less capable than it is today, and we were seeing fewer things than we are today, and fewer intrusions over restricted airspace, I rather doubt it. This is, by the way, only one of the number of multi-billion-dollar systems that are already deployed. They're collecting data that bears directly on this topic and don't seem to be reporting anything to Aero. So Aero issued a report. In their last report, they said, we don't have anything, haven't seen any UAP in space, but there were, I think, 40 instances in which ground-based reporters, like civilian airline pilots, reported things far above, beyond what they call the Kármán line in 100,000 feet, which is what they consider outer space for these purposes. Now, there's another system called the ground-based electro-optical deep space surveillance system, which is a ring of cameras circling the globe that does nothing but stare at the night sky all night long. How come those systems didn't detect what these pilots are talking about? They're looking up saying, I saw these bright lights moving, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's one of these cameras on top of one of our highest peaks in Hawaii, and it does nothing but stare at the night sky. That same night sky all night long. Did it miss that? Was it a cloudy night? Has any of those cameras ever collected one of these incidents? They said there were 40. I would think somebody ought to take an inventory and say, we want to know which of these surveillance systems is reporting UAP and which are not, and what specifically are they reporting? Take an inventory. Again, is there a systemic problem or failure with these systems? The taxpayers spending billions of dollars, I would think we would want to know that. Now, interestingly, with regard to the GI system, I, on one occasion, had a colleague who was visiting for a sort of routine oversight purpose many years ago. And I said, while you're there, Pete, why don't you ask them if they ever seen anything strange? I didn't want to say flying saucer, but that's what I was alluding to. And he knew what I was talking about. So he asked the question, and sure enough, just a month before, on that one occasion, when the question was asked, they had indeed collected photographic imagery of what was 4 or 5 objects moving through the night sky in formation, traveling parallel to the Earth's surface. I don't know that the question has ever been asked since. That was probably 20 years ago. I find it hard to believe that in that time that they haven't collected anything relevant to this question. And I don't understand why that data is not getting error. I don't know if anyone has even got a checklist to make sure that when Congress issued this directive and said, there's a reporting requirement now, everybody needs to report this stuff, it needs to go to the Air Force, it needs to filter down through the commands. Is anything coming back up from these systems? Do these people even know they're supposed to report? And is there any reporting of that kind going on? There's another system called the Space-Based Infrared System. Multi-billion-dollar system. This is again in the unclassified domain, what I'm talking about here. There's quite a bit, additionally that is paid for by the taxpayer that's pertinent. It's a very robust system with satellites in multiple orbits, highly elliptical orbits, geospatial orbits, very high precision. It's looking for infrared and heat kinds of events. As far as I know, they have detected, reported to Arrow 0 UAP incidents. Okay, maybe nothing happened. Maybe they haven't seen anything, but it does make you wonder. In this case, it's particularly strange since we know there are dozens, if not hundreds, of UAP incidents happening within the areas that this system is supposed to be providing coverage of. For example, the famous Nimitz incident occurred, almost directly in front of the radar at Beale Air Force Base, right off the coast, and this went on for about a week or so, and you had objects descending from 60,000 feet and back up. So I don't think anyone could say, well, they were so small and they were so close to the water, it wasn't within range of the radar. These things were at very high altitudes, and this was going on a sustained basis. So my suspicion is, now I understand that that data could be highly classified. I could understand why it might not be the public domain. What I can't understand is why Arrow does not seem to be aware of this data, if it exists, and why the appropriate congressional committees do not seem to be aware of and informed of this. Do I realistically expect anything to happen because I'm raising this here? No, because I've been doing this for years. But what the heck? We're here, might as well try again. Let's go on to the next slide. So we have an incredible series of events that have been happening. I wrote an article a year ago to this month called "Who's Operating the Drones Plaguing the U.S. Military?" And it did actually get read by a producer for 60 Minutes, who subsequently did a piece which featured several four-star officers who in fact confirmed what I was discussing and alleging in the article with regard to the events that occurred at Langley Air Force Base and elsewhere. It is truly shocking. Here's the Air Combat Command, which is supposed to be protecting these gentlemen in this institution where we're sitting in Capitol Hill, in the White House, in the US government, and they can't protect their own airspace. They have to move our cutting edge F-22 fighter squadron to a Navy base from an Air Force base. And this is going on for, I forget how long it was, a couple of weeks roughly. And we're talking about strange craft, bright lights appearing over this base, making it unsafe to fly night after night after night. And to this day, we have no idea where they were coming from. We don't know their capabilities. We don't know who was controlling them. And that remains true, not just for that base and that incident, but for numerous other bases. So the first incident, and the war zone is a great source for people interested in this topic, by the way, terrific reporting. 2018 in Guam, we've installed a 1.5 billion anti-ballistic missile system. And these brightly lit small craft show up, they go right to the THAAD missile battery, and they're shining bright lights down on it of the photograph. And this happens 2 nights in a row. So back in 2018, it wasn't as apparent as it is now, but obviously those drones could have been weaponized. They could have easily taken that battery out and eviscerated the ballistic missile defense on our leading facility in the Pacific. Not to mention the fact, I just went to that Google Maps this morning to check that air base, and that air base, like Langley and like so many others, has very few hardened shelters. So those multi-$100-million aircraft that are on the runway could easily be destroyed by drones that are costing, what, a few $1,000? Okay, that's how vulnerable we are. Then in 2019, we began to see this activity off the coast of the United States in California. And I'll read a little excerpt from one of those reports. USS Paul Hamilton observed 4 UAS with the closest point of approach approximately 200 yards off the bow, port and starboard beams. They had a on-time station of approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. So if you have children and you have drones at home, you know that they usually have a maximum time of about 20 minutes. Okay, these were in station for 2 hours and 20 minutes, 60, 80 miles off the shore, not apparent where they could have been launched from, what their total dwell time was. The anti-UAS systems on the ship were ineffective in bringing them down. The first UAS spotted by lookouts at 2:40, observed with a single white light. They go on to report others within 500 yards, maneuvering fore and aft with 4 white lights and a flashing red light. They're not trying to be sly. They're not trying to be clandestine. Approximately 200 yards above the ship, again, maneuvering right around the ship, back and forth, up and down. They went to the bridge of the ship with a powerful searchlight or photographic device. So they're actually, we've had cases where they go right up to the bridge of the ship and shine a bright light in on the captain and the senior crew. That's how overt and provocative this is, and that apparently reflects their degree of confidence that we can intercept them and bring them down, whoever it is that's operating them. That same year, we began to see them around nuclear power plants. In 2020, very strange situation out west. This went on not just for weeks, this went on for months. In one of the least densely populated, there's a slide that kind of shows, I think maybe it's back, roughly the part of the region we're talking about here. Yeah, eastern Colorado and western Oklahoma. So we're talking about farmland. I drove out west of Keene last winter and drove kind of through that area. It is incredibly sparsely populated. There's very, very, very little there. And yet these drones were operating in groups, clusters, as many as 40 drones at a time. They formed this was so extensive and there was so much eventual furor raised among the ranchers and farmers that they formed a task force involving the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement. They deployed a special plane that the governor of California authorized that had sensors on it. And this continued to occur. And we never found out where these things were coming from, who was operating them. I called a sheriff there and spoke to him about it. He told me a fascinating story. He said he was actually a deputy sheriff, but the sheriff was also a witness. They responded to a call, and there were a group of these lights over this farm, and a brighter light came in, a larger light, and the smaller lights went inside of it. And it took off at an extreme velocity and passed almost directly over the sheriff and the deputy. And he told me, I've never seen anything move that fast. He's also in the military reserves, this individual. So, and that report, by the way, he called it a mothership. It's not just the story that I happen to hear. If you look at the documentation from Air Force Office of Special Investigation, the FBI, and so forth, you'll see written documentation from other witnesses that refers to a mothership. So this is actually well documented, very strange and very concerning. We don't know what is operating in our airspace, and this continues, often in militarily sensitive areas. 2023, Arizona test ranges, you've heard about Langley, but we do a lot of flying in the Southwest. Flying conditions are great. It's a terrific place for the Air Force. We have large Air Force bases there. And some of the strange things we're seeing in the number and the rate and frequency with which this is happening is extraordinary. So this includes, now your average drone is restricted to a flight of 450 feet. We've got F-35s and F-22s, well in this case F-35s. They're encountering drones at 15,000 feet, 17,000 feet, 35,000 feet, going 500 miles per hour in restricted military airspace. Meanwhile, in the adjacent area, and I included in my PowerPoint briefing, you can find videos from the Department of Homeland Security, 9 of them, about some of the strange things that they're seeing on the border. Very, very odd things. Now, this raises a little bit of an issue that I've written about recently also, with the hope that it might prove some assistance to this task force, which is, why is it the Department of Homeland Security can publish all these videos, but Aero can't and DOD can't? There was a hearing before Congress years ago with Mr. Bray from the Navy, and he said, I assure you, I'm going to review these videos and make sure that we get out to you and the public everything we can. I think maybe there's been one video in 3 years since then. When I've looked into this and talked to people at different parts of the federal government and Aero and so forth, they basically said nobody feels it's their job to turn this over to the public. Nobody wants to make the effort to submit it for public release. So back in 2017, I provided 3 unclassified videos to the New York Times. You've all seen those, Gimbal, FLIR, Go Fast, right? There are a lot more like that. They just haven't been released because shortly after that, somebody created a classification guide which suddenly said, in contradiction to the executive order on classification signed by the president, that anything, essentially anything having to do with UAP is now suddenly mystically classified because it might damage national security. Even though those 3 videos, the FBI, the Office of Special Investigations, the Air Force investigated, confirmed they were classified. Not only did they not damage national security, they helped national security. They helped raise an awareness for the public and for Congress that we have an air defense problem here. And the scientific community is very eager to get more of those kinds of videos because they want to train AI systems. They want to know what it is we're looking for. They want to measure the signatures. There's a lot they can contribute to this, but the bureaucracy is not responding. And I think I couldn't put a number on it, but I believe that if someone were to poke that system and force them to review that classification guide, if someone were to establish some advocacy for taking that which is truly unclassified and admittedly absolutely, there are many things, videos that are appropriately classified, not questioning that. What I am saying is that there are others that fall into this camp that would have value to the public, value to Congress, value to the scientific community, and this is not an expensive proposition. It's just a matter of getting somebody to focus on it and to put these through the process. And I think the public not only has a right to know, I think it's beyond that. I think there's a utilitarian function. There's great value in the public knowing this information, value to the scientific community in having this information. I give the example sometimes of what happened was, and I promise I'm going to get off the stage like real fast. I'm starting to fall into my own stuff here that I get into, but the Sputnik program, I have no doubt if they could have kept it secret, the CIA would not have told the American people the Russians had a satellite in orbit. And we wouldn't have had the space program when we did. We wouldn't have gotten to the moon when we did. Because the people would have gotten fired up and said, oh my God, this is not acceptable that the Russians are ahead of us and we need to act. And Congress took action. And it was, it actually, ironically, we ended up collaborating with the Russians in space. And it actually helped facilitate some peaceful developments and relations. I think there are a lot of benefits along those lines that they could accrue. But it's going to take some effort and on the part of Congress, I think, to compel this to happen if it's going to happen. So with that, I will close and thank our congressional sponsors for taking an interest in this and giving us the opportunity to express our concerns and share what we've learned thus far about this problem. Thank you.
Can I ask a 5-second question? This high resolution 4K videos of UAP, is this stuff that you know about or is this stuff that you've seen?
Well, there's some stuff that I've seen and I've asked about, and I think there's one video I've seen that they're going to declassify. And I hope that happens. It wasn't I wouldn't say it was 4K, it was more like what you've seen, is infrared sensor, gun camera video along the lines of what the New York Times published and the Washington Post subsequently. So it's that kind of video from that sensor system.
So we know it exists. It's there.
Oh, yeah. And now, by the way, we're at a point now where the Arrow has received somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,800 military reports. 1,800 in just the last few years. Some of those are iPhone videos, so I don't think there's a big sources of methods issue there. There's a variety of, some are from, stuff you get at Best Buy from sailors on the ship with a video camera, like that. There's gotta be a number in that mix that could be revealed. And beyond that, as I said, I think there's a lot of high caliber sensor data. The American people have already paid for many of these sensors. They're out there, many of them, and they're collecting pertinent data. Dr. Loeb has benefited from the data that had to do with the reentry of the interstellar vehicle. It was a great example of the taxpayer-funded system that contributed to science in a very meaningful way. I'm here to tell you, I think there's a lot more of that kind of thing that could be made available if someone did a thorough assessment of the sensor systems that we have and what they're collecting, and took a hard look at the classification issues. We also had a system, precedent ones where we cleared for global warming some scientists to look at some classified data related to that scientific problem set, and that's supposedly there's problems with that because scientists want to be able to publish reports. They want their colleagues to be able to see everything possible about the sources. But there are a variety of opportunities I think we're missing. At the same time, there's a huge national security issue here. We've got stuff in our skies, some of it could represent technological surprise that we need to find out about. You've got these unmanned systems at 35,000 feet. That's a mile higher than the top of Mount Everest, going 500 miles an hour in restricted military airspace. I would say we've got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you, Chris. Justice, I do not have the advantage of height that you do, so I have to bring this way down. I think Chris brings up a very good point. And the reason why I decided to share this photograph with you, taken from a civilian pilot now, is because the same challenges that our pilots, military pilots, are facing as to where to report it, who's going to analyze it, what do you do with the information, multiply that for the civilian aviation community. Do they report to the FAA? Do they report to NORAD? Maybe the Air Force? Maybe a civilian organization, right? Who's responsible for getting this information out? Again, let me caveat, this has not been vetted. This was taken by a civilian pilot. But once again, you would think this information would be important for somebody to look at. Certainly some in the government, certainly some of our representatives that are sitting here, right? These are over sensitive military installations. Whose are they? What are their capabilities? What are the intent? Right? But enough of me right now. Let's go on to our second expert here, Mr. Kirk McConnell. You know, I could sit here all day. Once again, these guests are just unbelievable. Kirk, my question is for you, and I'm going to go off script here for a minute. You have deep expertise and experience with the Senate Armed Services Committee. What is right now the greatest challenge you see for our Congress to tackle this topic on behalf of the American people? What is, if you had to narrow it down to one to three challenges, especially for our reps here that are sitting with us here today, so patiently, what would be, in your estimate, the three greatest challenges facing Congress tackling this topic?
Well, I would speculate. I'm not an elected official.
Can you all hear back there? No. Okay, let's go ahead.
How's that? I certainly don't want to speak for Congress. I do want to mention that I did serve 37 years as a staff member on Capitol Hill for the Senate Armed Services Committee and both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. I was not in the military. You got that wrong. So I've been up here a long time, but I have no voting card. Never have. I have tremendous respect for the institution, and I don't intend to reveal sort of inside baseball information. What I would say is, on a topic like this, my sense is that Congress needs a lot of confidence to push really vigorously. And where are they going to get that confidence that there is an absolute assurance that there's a reality here? And I think as much evidence as has been accumulated in the public domain over such a long period of time, it is subject to question. And we all know how that has proceeded over the period of decades. The key to this, in my opinion, is firsthand sources who can testify to direct involvement in this so-called legacy program of crash retrievals, reverse engineering. Unfortunately, there are people out there, I believe, from many reports, that are interested in coming forward and telling their story, but they are very much intimidated and frightened about doing that. They're afraid afraid of the consequences, including their own personal safety is what they relate. Their personal safety, certainly their career, starting with their security clearances, which is the means that they have to make a living. And they have observed some folks who have come forward, not to mention you, Lou, and Dave Brush, and have seen what those folks have gone through, and most of them say, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I think we're sort of in a tough situation. It's almost like, catch-22. We need more primary sources, but it's hard to get people with that kind of information to come forward because of the fear of retaliation.
We need a better whistleblower.
Sir, that's something that I'm sure, as you know, has been discussed in both the Senate and the House.
Why don't you draw me something up really tight?
Yes, sir. So whistleblower protections is and finding ways to even compensate them if they do have negative consequences from coming forward, and so forth. So I certainly think this is a major factor. I would just let you ask the next question.
Actually, Chris, please jump in. Yeah, so there was, I came prepared to address that issue as well. And I came prepared to contribute what I could to that question as well. But the classified session was canceled. I think due to the sensitivity of the names of the individuals and so forth. I didn't think it was appropriate to, of course, I could do it in an unclassified setting. If they do reschedule a classified setting, I think I'm more than happy to try to provide some specifics. I published a signal message I received from a very senior government official. He described a specific Secretary of the Air Force memorandum. He described a specific recovery site. He named the Air Force gatekeeper for the program. Nobody from Congress has asked me to follow up on that. I have all that information. I was prepared to share what I could about that, but I don't know that it would be definitive or lead to any conclusion. But I do think those names, due to privacy concerns of the individuals and so forth, obviously it's pretty sensitive. So I'm prepared to try to help with that as I can as well. But in this session, I wanted to address some of these other issues related to declassification.
Yes, a general question to either of you. What are the consequences, and either or both of you can answer, what are the consequences of Congress not taking action on this topic from a national security perspective?
Well, you heard Dr. Eric Davis expressing his understanding of the state of affairs in this arena, which is that the program, the legacy program, call it that, has been sort of stalled. That we're not making the best use of, allegedly, we're not making the best use of the best minds in the country. The compartmentalization allegedly has prevented the kind of coordination and collaboration between scientists to really practice very difficult set of physics problems. I'm sure that the security element that's had to be applied to this activity has come with a lot of costs in terms of effectively managing And it is alleged that this even extends within the executive branch, that very senior leaders in the executive branch aren't aware of this and are not, managing the effort. So it's not a leap or a stretch to suppose that we're hampering ourselves immensely by this continued compartmentation. And certainly Congress does not know whether this activity is being managed appropriately. We don't know if it's got the right level of resources, if it's got the right management structure, the right incentives, and so on and so forth. We think our government can work pretty well when we're managing things according to the rules. So I think that this is a detriment to national security, the lack of oversight and awareness. It's certainly possible to keep appropriately classified things classified and still have effective oversight and management both in the executive branch and Congress.
Speaking of keeping national security and secrets classified, which I completely agree with. There are very specific reasons why you want to keep certain aspects of this topic classified, sources and methods, etc., maybe certain capabilities. But let me ask, this is a question probably for you, Mr. Melton. In your opinion, what are the
Mr. Mellon.
I'm trying to well, because the fact I'm not wearing a tie, I have to make up for something. So I've already been accused of being too casual and too lax, so I'm trying to be more formal here. Chris, in your opinion, what are the consequences of retroactively classifying information previously unclassified, and are you aware of any specific incidents of information or data that was once unclassified that is now classified?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, though, I think there's piles of that stuff. And I think there's so much of it, it's kind of hard to gauge what the consequences are. Because my understanding is that they adopted the classification guide, which basically says anything and everything to do with UAP is classified heretofore. Now, people who haven't read the executive order may not be aware. The executive order says, when in doubt, you should err on the side of going unclassified. You're supposed to err on the side of transparency and openness to the American people. And when we're talking about many of these videos, if an F-18 F-clear targeting pod video was unclassified in 2017, and we're not talking about denied area or some other unusual exception, how could it be classified 2 years when you take the same video from the same system in the same area 2 years later? I don't get it, but that looks like what they did. And it avoids, it's typically, I argued vociferously against it at the time. I knew some of the people involved and tried to make the argument that, guys, we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't be having a discussion if information hadn't gotten into the public domain via Congress and the press. And that's why we've made the progress we've made to date. And now you want to drop a curtain on everything? What do I don't get it. So I can't really gauge the implications, but I do think they're negative. And I think it's inappropriate. I think it's probably unlawful.
My last question here before we move to a very short break for the next panel. I want to be respectful of time of both the congressional members and, of course, our panelists as well. This next question goes to you, Kirk. You mentioned a little bit about whistleblowers, and I know that, from my understanding, and you don't have to talk about it, but I know you received classified briefings before on this topic from specific subject matter experts and some of your colleagues. What can Congress do, specifically members such as Rep. Burleson, Rep. Shedd, Rep. Luna, their colleagues, to better protect whistleblowers, to incentivize
individuals to come forward and provide a minimum unclassified information in a way that they don't have to worry about retribution to their careers, and perhaps much worse, and classified information in the proper venue. What can Congress do to help improve that flow of information and minimize the reprisals that some of us have faced in the past?
Lou, I would first off like to say that there is an option, like people who do come forward and want to talk to committees in Congress don't have to go public. They can and have come to the Armed Services Committees, the Intelligence Committees, and in confidence, on a classified basis, have related what they know and what their experience has been. The members who have received that kind of accounts and witness statements have protected the identity of such people, and they have thereby been protected. The negative side of that is that the members can't go around and tell their colleagues what they have learned, because that risks the identity of people that have come forward in confidence, and therefore it doesn't empower members to then proselytize and get everyone geared up to really make a strong investigatory push. But it is an option for people to consider. I would also say that we have a gentleman here in the audience who has conducted a legal history of people who come forward to make classified statements to Congress over a long period of time, and he tells me that he can't find an instance where someone coming forward and giving classified information to Congress without sort of formal permission from the executive branch, that there's never been, I hope I'm getting this right, there's never been an indictment or much less a prosecution for doing that. Now, I certainly, I'm not a lawyer, and I certainly don't want to encourage people to sort of break the rules as they see, as they understand them, and what they're bound to by agreements that they sign. But it is at least something to think about, and potentially act on. That obviously takes a lot of courage to do that.
I just like to, this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but our panel's coming to an end, and I did want to share a concern I have, which is that we have two different issues here. We have UAP objects that we're observing in flight, active around military facilities that are, we have an issue of possible recovery of materials. These two issues in the public mind are blended. It's entirely possible that we might not have recovered materials, but UAP are very real. And here it's pressing and it's an urgent issue. And I have a concern that if that issue is not in some way validated or addressed, it runs the risk of discrediting the entire topic. And we've made enormous progress. Nothing happened essentially from the Blue Book days until 2017. And I fear that if there isn't some effective way of addressing this, that we run the risk of a major setback. I don't know how secure Arrow is in the long term. I'm not seeing interest on the part of the chairman of the committees that fund it, on the Armed Services and Intelligence committees. They don't seem to be engaged or supportive at this point. ends of probes. So I think we're in somewhat tenuous ground. Kirk might be probably in a better position to address this than me, but I think that the second thing that falls in that, if you were to confirm that, then how do you manage that? Who deals with that? It's such a transformational issue that it cannot be a press release that comes out from from Congress some afternoon, Friday afternoon or something. It's a literally cosmic issue that runs the risk of having a terrifying tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, frankly. So it's a very complex, interrelated set of issues, and I think we and whoever in Congress is providing oversight of this really needs to think through how to handle the two of those things. And our foundation obviously wants to help if we can, but I think it's a tough challenge for members who are very, very busy people with a lot on their plates and a complex one.
I'm going to make an exception. I'm going to continue this conversation because there's a question I want to ask. It's very, very important related to their expertise. Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, I wanted to get to the question that you actually asked, which is about whistleblower protections. And I'm by no means an expert or even really conversant on the topic of whistleblower protections. But, applying a common sense kind of standard, you need to have legislation that really is strong. There's a long record of whistleblowers, despite whistleblower protections in the law, they get retaliated against, and they lose their jobs, they lose their careers, and it happens with enough regularity that no one could blame people for not wanting to risk it. So the legislation would need to be very robust, and I think it would need to include things like restitution, possibility of the government making good on loss of their career, loss of security clearances, if it comes to that, and making making sure that that people are not going to suffer these consequences, even though the law says they should never have suffered those consequences. You got to clean up the mess that tends to happen. So anyway, I'll limit myself to those.
So one last question. I know I said it before. I'm going to, again, break the rule here real quick, but I'm going to ask you very quickly. Let's try to, if we can, a question, but try to keep it succinct if we can. And this is for both of you. And I think this is part of the challenge that Congress faces. Okay, so we all want to protect national security. How do you separate protecting blue force technologies, perhaps hypothetically, gained from the insights of UAP recovery programs, but at the same time leveling with the American people about the reality, the fundamental reality that we do not have a current understanding of everything in our sky, right? Our U.S. air domain awareness, we do not have a complete sight picture. And two, that there may be technologies that are not from us and that warrant further investigation. Again, but at the same time, protecting if we have any technologies, hypothetically, that have been developed as a result.
Well, Lou, we heard from Dr. Davis and many others who believe that we haven't made much progress with respect to deciphering what the physics are behind NHI and these craft that are coming here. At the same time, we don't really know that is true. We haven't made progress. Maybe we made great progress, and that we have stuff ourselves that could be pretty marvelous. Right? And certainly there can be absolutely vital reasons for protecting that kind of information. one thought that is across my mind is, people say, if the United States government has been into this, why in the world wouldn't the government have made these kinds of technologies known for the betterment of our citizens and for mankind? And one thought is like, what if once you understand the science, what if the engineering? I know Eric Davis thinks that we're maybe 1,000 years from being able to do this, but what if it's not true? And the government is on the horns of a dilemma. Like, it's got energy sources that might be an absolute boon to mankind, but it also is looking at the weaponization of that, and it's terrifying. And so, is there a way that you can exploit that for your own benefit militarily, but keeping this thing somehow, this genie bottled up, where it doesn't come into the hands of a North Korean dictator? I don't have answers. Lou, I think you've got to deal with this range of possibilities. But the first thing you got to do is understand it. Like, we have to understand what the government knows, and until we do, it's going to be hard to develop a rational strategy for managing this. I don't know if that's
Chris?
I don't think they'll. I think you can manage it. I'll leave it at that. I've said too much already, and I'm eager to get off the stage and turn it over to others.
All right, folks, 3 minutes. Thank you very much for
So that's the end of part 2. This is Dr. Mouse. Thanks for joining me, everybody from all around the world. If you feel so inclined, you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel at All Things Unexplained, please hit the subscribe button, like this video, comment. We appreciate it. It's the best way you can help us out. You can also check out our YouTube store. We've got a lot of great things on there. Super Chat, Super Stickers is also available. That's another good way to help the show. There's a lot of great commentary on this going on Twitter, X right now, including at our Twitter at AT Unexplained, including a pretty good analysis of the UFO photo that Elizondo held up, but a lot of other theories on that too. But there was a code on there. It said FL210 near 4 corners, and that should stand for flight level 210 or 21,000 feet. In other words, the object was either photographed from 21,000 feet or it was at 21,000 feet. We don't know which one. And then near 4 corners represents the 4 corners area of New Mexico. I believe that's the northwest corner of New Mexico and the other 3 states that border that there. We know we have a lot of sensitive sites. Some interesting things happening back in the video there. And of course, I'm still my mind is blown about the Eric Davis revelation about the alien species. I admit, I never thought I would hear any of that in front of lawmakers. I admit I didn't. I mean, who knows what we'll hear next? We might hear something about abductions, but the implications of all this is just mind-blowing, just mind-blowing what they're saying. That photograph even, I mean, that's some War of the Worlds level stuff right there. If even a shred of any of this has truth to it, then getting to the bottom of it should be the primary concern for every lawmaker. The number one primary concern. It would be of the utmost urgency, more urgent than anything in the history of mankind. You're watching Understanding UAP. Brought to you by the UAP Disclosure Fund. Let's see if I can get this advanced. Just a little. We see a lot of interesting mingling on there. Do I recognize anybody? Heard somebody from UFO Twitter was there. There's Avi Loeb again, Burchett, Gallaudet. Everybody's shaking hands. Looks like we're getting close here. If you're watching on YouTube or X, say hello. Let me know you're here. I appreciate you.
Anybody who's standing up, please take your seats unless you are part of the camera crew. So first, folks, let me first extend my sincere appreciation and thanks for everyone's patience. As you can see, we could probably stay all day with just one panelist alone. Lots to discuss. We are barely scratching the surface here. The next discussion is really going to be part of a scientific discussion. And so the two panelists you have here are experts in their own fields and recognized as a global leader in their particular expertise. So what I'd like to do first is introduce Ms. Anna Brady Estevez, founding partner at American Deep Tech, former SBA Innovation Advisor for Kaufman Fellow, and on the UAP DF Advisory Board. But what you may not know is that Ms. Brady Estevez is deeply involved with the National Science Foundation. And that involvement really includes looking at pioneering new ways to invest American talent, scientific talent, into new and emerging areas of science. Right? Where do we decide to put our money and our effort in the next 20 years? Right? Where do we get that return on investment? What does that look like? Right? And how do we force ourselves to think outside the box to be creative? Don't invent tomorrow's technology. Invent the technology after tomorrow. Right? And it's that type of creative thinking that has traditionally kept this country ahead of everybody else. And I ask you to, when she speaks, listen to what she has to say, because this is, in my opinion, this is the future. Not just this topic, but any topic requiring innovation. If you don't innovate, you stagnate. If you don't stagnate, you perish. That's just the bottom line, right? We live in a competitive world. The next individual is a colleague and friend of mine, Mr. Mike Gold. Mr. Mike Gold is president of the Civil and International Space at Redwire, member of the NASA UAP Independent Study Team, former NASA Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, former Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations and Senior Advisor to the Administrator for International and Legal Affairs, former Vice President for Civil Space at Maxar Technologies, former Director of DC Operations and Business Growth at Bigelow Aerospace. You might remember that word from somewhere else, and that involvement. And last but certainly not least, as a member of NASA, am I correct to say a mission manager with the Artemis team? Did I get that right? I've got two things wrong so far today, so I want to make sure you're right.
I'm a recovering attorney. They wouldn't let me close the prior mission. So I was the architect of the Artemis course, however, the global partnership of 54 countries, explore new Mars and beyond.
Excellent. And that's it, right? explore moon, Mars, and beyond. There is something for you to consider. There was an estimate done that the future of mankind, our species, is not here. In fact, if you were to look at the financial opportunities, it was estimated that 1 times 10 to the 18th power amount of money this world has ever made globally in all its time as modern civilization. Multiply that by a factor of 18, and that's the value of the resources that lie within the inner asteroid belt of our solar system, right? So the future is there. As a microbiologist and immunologist, there's one primary directive of all life systems that we know, and that's to expand. If you don't expand, you will perish. In fact, you can look at a petri dish, and if you put the right amount of nutrients, bacteria will do the same. Take a plant, give it nutrients and water, it will grow and take over. That is the primary directive of all life, and we are no exception to that. So keep that in mind as these two individuals are going to talk to you about the importance of this topic, the UAP topic, and how it relates to the scientific community. Am I mistaken that you have a presentation for us? So what I'd like to do is turn it over. First of all, welcome our two guests, our esteemed guests. And do you have a presentation, or are you going to do the just questions and answers?
I'll go verbal, yeah.
Okay, verbal, got it. Mike, come on up and let's get you started.
Thanks so much. Is it okay if I go from here? Yeah, great. Sure. In terms of expansion, I can tell you my doctor says I'm expanding far too much every day.
Yeah, me too. I'm in the same boat.
A lot of trouble. Thank you so much, Lou, not only for today, but for all you have done to push this topic. You are an American hero, as well as the congressman and many others in this room, from the journalists to the scientists, to the advocates, to the pilots. It's just an honor to be here. I appreciate what everyone has done. Also, thank you, Redwire Board of Directors, for letting me out of the meeting early. That was a wonderful discussion. I think this is going to be a lot more exciting. If I could point you to my opening slide, that is actually an image taken by the Blue Ghost lunar lander with Redwire Argus cameras. I'm going to get in why that is such an extraordinary image in a moment. But before we get there, we were having a discussion about substances and what these new substances look like, new materials, what this UAP technology would be. And I've been given the challenging, if not an enviable task of saying, how could UAP technology impact innovation without knowing quite what that UAP technology is, even fundamentally? So what I'd like to try and do today is give you an example of how microgravity is impacting innovation in really almost every industrial field, and how that could be transformative. I don't know if extraterrestrial civilizations are using this. I think they likely would be, but I think this is an example of how a fundamental shift in technology can change everything. Our company, Redwire, has been conducting experiments on the International Space Station, on the space shuttle, for literally decades. We've flown hundreds of experiments over the past 35 plus years. We have 11 experiments active on the International Space Station right now, more than any other company. You see Senator John Glenn running one of our experiments there. The first one I'd like to show you is the biofabrication facility, the BFF. We're great at acronyms at Redwire. If you can play the video, please. This is, by the way, an over 400-pound payload. It broke the table at our facility in Greenville, Indiana. Much easier to handle in orbit. That astronaut, a Cubs fan, working very quickly, like coffee, at 20 times speed, but he's installing what is a biofabrication unit. And that system has allowed us to manufacture human tissue in space. It resulted in the first human meniscus being printed in space. Who needs a meniscus? No idea. Probably use two, right? Exactly. This is the impact of microgravity. If you try to create that meniscus on Earth, and again, I'm a recovered attorney, so I'm going to put it simply, it squishes. You couldn't do that in a gravity environment. It's not space per se. It's the lack of gravity that allows you to do these incredible things. Subsequent to the success we had with the meniscus, we printed live cardiovascular tissue. And we brought it back from the International Space Station, still live, Think what this could mean for people suffering from heart disease, the creation of heart patches. And of course, the goal of all of this is ultimately to create whole organs in space. How many of us have had friends and relatives die while waiting on an organ donation list? This could change all of that. Additionally, because we would be using your own stem cells to create the tissue, the organs, we would avoid the dangerous and expensive anti-rejection therapies that you go through. So we see how microgravity could have a dramatic impact in terms of life sciences. Also, pharmaceuticals. Redwire has flown 28 pillboxes. These are systems where we take pharmaceuticals, drugs, fly the seed crystals. And seed crystals, by the way, they're like a sourdough starting kit. They're what the drugs are made out of. And when you create seed crystals in microgravity, they're larger, more uniform, and that results in drugs with better efficacy, better longevity, fewer side effects. Here's an example that is very near and dear to my heart, insulin. We partnered with Eli Lilly, we flew insulin. Over on the left side of that, that's what insulin seed crystals look like when you create them on Earth. Over on the right side, that's what insulin looks like in space, the seed crystals. Again, I got a B- in biology as a high school student. Even I can tell the difference between one and the other. And because of those larger, more uniform crystals, you could have a version of insulin. We've seen versions of cancer treatment drugs that, whereas you have to go through chemotherapy that would be injected, again, long, painful, you could potentially get to a version of the drug where it could be administered orally. So a tremendous difference here relative to the pharmaceutical sector. And by the way, it's not just us who know this, is China. And the Chinese have their space station, they're going after the same research. So, Congressman, I would invite us to look at the International Space Station, replacing it with a commercial space station. This revolution with biotech and microgravity is going to happen. The only question, is it going to happen here in America, the free world, or is it going to be happening in China? And I do not want to be buying my next generation of pharmaceuticals, drugs from the Chinese. So we need to continue to support this, create new developments, but this is just life sciences and biotech. Again, micrograv will impact semiconductors, the same principles. When you form crystals in space, you can create new types of semiconductors that are more powerful, more tolerant of heat. Agriculture, you can create seeds, new types of plants that can flourish in the desert. We have a greenhouse that we're flying in space, looking at many of that efforts. You see that there. We also have systems for what's called Z-WAN fiber, where it's a new type of fiber optic that can be incredibly more powerful. Again, every aspect of our technological society could be changed by this innovation. Is this something that UAP are using? Is this new substances that they're using? I don't know, perhaps. But you see how this field will revolutionize everything. And I believe in the future, the leaders in microgravity will not only be the leaders in economics, but in national security as well. As a matter of fact, that meniscus sprint, the customer for that was the Uniformed Services University, because the number one injury to our men and women in uniform are meniscus tears. Now I'd like to talk about who wants to see some unclassified data, right? Let's talk about some imagery that we're getting from NASA. As Lou mentioned, I was proud to be a member of NASA's UAP independent study team. We had some very common sense recommendations, one of which that I testified here in the House not too long ago, alongside Greg Elizondo and others, was that we need to go into the NASA archives, get the imagery, review it, make it public, and look at what we've got. This is an example that hit the internet not too long ago. Is it a Tic Tac? It's on Mars? I don't know. I'm not qualified to say, but someone should be looking at it, and we should be collecting and collating the data. Here's one that's even more interesting to me. Lunar horizon glow. This is a phenomenon that we first saw with the surveyor systems. This is named a glow that we're seeing on the horizon of the moon. We saw it with the robotic surveyors, and what you see in the upper left-hand side are sketches that Apollo astronauts made of this phenomenon. A glowing dome, streaks of light shooting out from the lunar surface, pretty extraordinary. And then, most recently, this was my cover slide, with the Blue Ghost system, which which is NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, CLIPS, a wonderful public-private partnership to reach the moon. With Redwire Argus cameras, we took this image of the lunar horizon glow. What you might hear if you go on a NASA website or talk to some in the scientific community is that this effect is from dust that has been electrostatically charged and then levitated to create this impact. Now, again, I'm not saying one way or the other, but Dr. I should go back and give him credit. Dr. Manischew's direct job, I'm going to mess up his name, I apologize, it's in the slides, but a wonderful professor who's been associated with UAP's Disclosure Fund and doing work on this topic, providing these slides. And I can tell you NASA's own research, LADI, other systems, is putting some big question marks as to even if there is enough dust to create this event, which looks unlikely, and that if dust could be electrostatically charged to cause what looks like a second sunrise. And that's not the sun, by the way, it's below the horizon. I mean, that is an extraordinary image. And by the way, when I first saw this picture, I was like, is that algae on the moon? And what you're seeing is light refraction occurring due to, I don't know what. So I don't know what this is. Is it a dome? Is it some type of natural phenomenon that we don't understand or aren't aware of? But I'll tell you, definitely, it's a unidentified anomalous phenomenon, which bears looking and bears understanding. And this is a good example, too, of even if it's a natural or prosaic phenomenon, there's something extraordinary occurring here. We should be delving into it. We should be studying it and understanding it. And on the off chance that it does turn out to be something extraordinary, I mean, we need to know what is occurring here. Additionally, here's another shot, publicly available from the NASA archives. You've seen some imagery of the triangular UAPs in the past. What's that? Debris? Satellites?
That's from the moon, right?
That's Apollo 17.
We had that picture.
Images from Apollo 17.
A few of us saw something like that last Friday.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Satellites, debris, Klingons. What is it? I don't know. Lou, you know? Congressman, you know what that is? Why are we not investigating this? And what I would ask of our brave members of Congress who are here is, again, with relatively little effort and money, we should be leveraging AI and ML to go into the NASA archives. So much of this has been digitized, more every day, and conduct a review of what's publicly available on UAP. We spend so much time here, justifiably so, talking about classified material, what's being hidden. Yet there is a treasure trove of data that, if not a smoking gun, certainly is fascinating and worth looking at and applying the scientific method to. And these images that you're seeing here, and here's more of another UAP from Apollo, more of potentially Stonehenge, strange structures on the moon, lunar anomalies that look like Buddhist temples. And I'm not saying necessarily all of these have extraordinary explanations. Maybe some of them don't, maybe some of them do. But it certainly is worth the effort to investigate. And we're not doing that right now. Why? Because of the stigma, this pernicious stigma that prevents us from tackling it. And sir, that's where we're going to need your help. That I have many friends at NASA that are interested in this topic, fascinated by it, want to delve into it, but they need top cover. And that's why I'd be so grateful to be offline, talk more about what we can do with a new NASA administrator coming in. And this isn't going to cost a lot of money. You know, this could be done with very little time, very little effort, yet the results could be extraordinary. Finally, as we get back to technology, I just wanted to level set relative to what it takes to travel in space. 3 days to the moon, 7 to 10 months to Mars. I can tell you exposure to radiation during that trip, quite dangerous and challenging. 77,000 years to Proxima Centauri, our closest star. I mean, that's worse than my flights on United. That's rough. And then 1.7 million years to get to where we've seen some biosignatures for the first time. If we're truly going to explore space, we're going to need some innovative technology. And here we already spent some time discussing the Alcubierre warp drive. This was a Mexican physicist who did the initial work proving that within demonstrated science, and I would defer to Eric Davis here, but this is not extraordinary science, that a warp drive could exist. The challenge with Alcubierre's warp drive is that it would require roughly the mass of Jupiter converted into energy to operate. I mean, I had a Chevy Suburban, and that was not fuel efficient. This would be even more difficult. But scientists at NASA, what was then NASA's EagleWorks, tweaked basically the architecture of the Alcubierre warp drive, and perhaps found some ways to get that down to more the mass of the VW, something that we could work with. So these are the kinds of technologies that if there is a gravitic system, or some kind of extraordinary technology, we must have it in order to traverse those distances and have America and our international partners lead in space exploration. Additionally, energy. I mean, if we are sitting on extraordinary technology, zero-point energy, the Casimir effect, as we discussed, think of the good we could do in terms of saving the environment, improving the economy, creating a post-scarcity society. It would be extraordinary, it would be wonderful. And let me just end by saying the reverse of that is we do not want to fall behind China relative to leveraging extraordinary technology. I don't know if there's alien tech out there. There may be, there might not be, but can we risk falling behind the Chinese in reverse engineering if there is such technology? And this is again where the stigma is so pernicious. But I'm sure China has its top officials working on this 24/7, coordinated, whereas us, it's separated, it's compartmentalized, it's MIT working on it, it's Caltech working on it. No. We cannot risk losing communist China because we can't take this issue seriously. We must not let a lack of vision turn into a lack of freedom. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for the brief presentation, folks. Again, time is of the essence, so I'm going to make these as succinct as possible.
Is it okay if I present as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to present. I was going to ask you some questions actually about that, so please have the floor.
Well, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate, Mike, all the work you've done in microgravity, and certainly for, any of these craft that are above, that are in space above the one government, they have that access to microgravity should they choose to use it. At our firm, American Deep Tech, we're very focused on a number of areas of deep technology, including space tech, energy, and advanced bio, including one of our co-founders, Kat with Hespera. They believe they identified a cancer kill switch, and I know you work together.
We're talking.
Yeah, it's a cancer kill switch in microgravity. So just, for pharmaceuticals, that access to microgravity, you see the aging within 9 days that it would take a year terrestrially for a tumor. So that ability to speed up that iteration on drug development is very important. So we've got some really interesting people that we work with, a CTO coming out of NASA, a branch chief coming out of Space Force, some very high growth entrepreneurs. And we also work with some leaders, as our advisors and venture partners in the UAP space, because we see the keys, of these areas of technology to drive that abundance, that competitive advantage, and just societal benefits. So people like we're fortunate to have as our advisor Hal Puthoff, and also to work with people like Julia Mossbridge and Ryan Graves and Diane Pinkhausen. So I know that they are active in so many areas of technology, but also in UAP. And so how did we come, in my former roles, which I thank you so much for that kind introduction, which I've completed my roles in the US government, where I was the co-chair alongside NASA of the US Space Economy Interagency Working Group. We worked with exceptional innovation forward, UAP forward and open leaders across the interagency, and those meetings are public, they're available online, US Space Disruptors Day, And that was a day of about, 10, sometimes 12 hours of presentations on in-space biotechnology, in-space semiconductors, US launch, also UAP, also advanced consciousness, AI, communications and satellites. So there was actually interagency leadership that co-hosted this UAP leading content from NASA, Space Force, DOE, DHHS, Air Force. These were all very senior people, NSF and SBA. So while I would say that in years past, before this great movement towards transparency and gratitude for those in the room who really led that, since the 2017 timeframe and before, time has changed. And innovation is not about, unfortunately, because we want everybody to come along. We appreciate, it's great once you get beyond 50%. Innovation and science are not about consensus. This isn't, we don't wait to get to 51%. This is the leaders are doing this. The fast followers are also doing this. And the reasons why they're doing this is because they're sitting in rooms, groups of people. We had an extended electrodynamics group of leaders from across the interagency and also the private sector. And they were working on advanced energy. They were working on advanced communications. They're funded entrepreneurs. At NSF Public Awards, we funded and I funded companies working on what the entrepreneurs later described as UAP adjacent or UAP inspired technologies. One of those, actually, multiple of those people have spoken, having worked on programs that they can't go into great depth about, but certainly others are undertaking that private sector research where it's not about it being classified first. And this, but the point on how do you get your communications back and forth to Mars, without dealing with the 40-minute latency? How do you do that? And what are the approaches for breaking those barriers? How do you achieve this energy abundance and that more efficient launch capability? So it was these conversations on what could be achieved and what's already been in some cases declassified in terms of work and outcomes, or was never classified, really led to conversations where we invited in experts who then said, do you want my extended electrodynamics presentation, or you want my UAP presentation? We said, we'd like both of those. And so what that led to was receiving that tremendous presentation from Hal, from Charles Chase, and from others, and saying, actually, can give this to more people. And so they gave those types of presentations to hundreds of people. And what we found with those entrepreneurs was this was the highest level of engagement.
Appears to be some technical difficulties.
We ever got in any
There we go.
field of science or technology. I'm seeing people in the audience who are part of it shaking their heads yes. So the entrepreneurs were so eager, and scientists, to engage in the UAP science and technology. And as a frame of reference, when we talk about disruptive technology, I've worked with a few of them because I've had the opportunity to fund around 400 companies, so work with thousands of entrepreneurs. Those companies, from just a quarter billion plus put out, have gone on to raise 8.5 billion in follow-on financing and 17.5 billion in total market cap just in the early years. That's coming out of a place that the program, which is not the UAP program, but a program that has catalyzed well over $350 billion, from well less than 20, probably 12 billion put out over several decades. So these entrepreneurs, oftentimes these highest growth ones, regardless of what they're working in, it can be batteries, they're told never going to work. I mean, we all have batteries, right? People will say a higher performing battery, here's why it's not going to work. So these entrepreneurs are used to being told no and why not, and they still build things. And what's happening today, not just in America, but around the world, because the first time I saw these experiences was overseas, is people are seeing ultra advanced craft that are higher performing. And for people that are building the highest performing craft and the highest performing energy, they are not trying to unsee what they have seen, you know, and that they've caught on a wide range of sensors. There is the classified sensors, and then there's the sensors like this. We have imagery, you know, on our phones from going out and seeing things. So I think that the impetus to build things is what's driving this. And what would be the right levels to really go after this? You know, this is something that a few of us have spoken about, but my background's also as a strategist. So we do a lot of strategy now. And I used to be at BCG. And the question of, if you're building the highest performing systems, what type of resources would you put in place? So if we look at, you know, and I'm sharing kind of casually Googled numbers so we can get to better definition. But how much money went into the ISS, our long-term in-space laboratory? Some of the numbers online say that it was well over 70 billion for the US part of that, and that with other nations' contributions, it might be 150 billion. What was the cost of the Apollo program? That was 26 billion, you know, from the 60s to the 70s. Some estimates put that at inflation adjusted well over 200, perhaps $250 billion. So if you were to ask me today, what is the right amount of money to be investing in these ultra high performing technologies, these Manhattan style projects, it's well into the hundreds of billions of dollars. That's the right answer today. Whether the US makes that investment or whether somebody else does, we are talking about advantage for multi-trillion-dollar markets. So some would say perhaps we made the right investments over time, that we've invested those tens of billions, those hundreds of billions. And if we have, how do we celebrate the accomplishments that might have come out of those programs? How do we give the recognition to those scientists, those people who have served, who perhaps have not been able to speak about their work? How do we derive value from that? How do we say these pieces that might have been constrained because you didn't have access to the tools everybody else has access to on the outside and the collaboration, how can we bring the pieces in a way that is respectful to national security and increases resilience and abundance? And I am concerned, I mean, I appreciate it. I think many of us want transparency, but also how do we make that so that the people who may have worked in this want to come forward? You know, so if we're offering them, oh, you built something, you're given resources, and here's some punishment, that's going to be hard to get the technology out. You know, and there's lots of ways that could be brought fully forth. It could be anonymized into a centralized clearinghouse. If there's valuable technology there that can help people in the United States and around the world, let's celebrate what's been built and let's fill the gaps that are there. So we see tremendous opportunity. The race is on. Some would say those are exceptionally large programs. Many of us have seen this wide range of phenomena, be they craft, be they orbs. The reason it matters, so sometimes the first time you see this phenomena, it's a point of interest, and you say, wow, you know, I kind of thought there was life off planet, whether it's life off planet or advanced terrestrial technology, but you think, well, okay, interesting, now back to our day-to-day, what do we do with this? And so a number of us came to, because our core roles were advanced energy, advanced computation, advanced biology, the answer was people who are working in their core fields, biotechnology, quantum, that they're seeing some of the potential paths forward through this UAP adjacent technology. Can we classify it today? I don't know how. I mean, there are parts that we can say, stay away from this due to this risk. But the challenge on some of this is, if you're to say, will classify UAP technology. You just got to stop working on it. For people that are familiar with the science and the technology, there are elements of this that are relevant to quantum and quantum entanglement. So what does that mean for our national posture on quantum? AI is interwoven with this. You talk about microgravity and advanced materials. So do we just not do certain layering or advancement of certain materials because they've been found in crash retrieval? We're not able to walk back because this is so interwoven. So saying that UAP is off limits, that's like saying, let's go home. Let's, maybe, can we still use fire? Maybe, let's look into it. Can you still use rocks? So many of the fields of technology would be off limits. So honestly, we don't know how to this idea, once you're in that, you don't even know, it's like saying stop using math. So the entrepreneurs are getting inspired, they're seeing things. And so this is kind of humorous to scientists. So we both appreciate that people are talking about crash retrievals and reverse engineering. Are there crash retrievals? Well, are there crashes? I mean, there's deer retrievals where I live. I mean, a crash seems a lot more interesting than a deer to pick up. And anybody who knows an engineer says the first time you see anything of interest, you're certainly going to reverse engineer it. So whether that happens inside government programs or whether it happens out in the streets, Americans and people around the world are seeing this phenomena, and those that build things are saying, what do we build together? So we've seen these on a number of occasions. We've brought some high-ranking scientists down to folks who are able in spots where these show up more frequently. And it's worth noting that there are people, a number of groups of people who are currently pulling in or attracting craft, and other phenomena. And some people just happen to see them. I'm looking right at you, Ron. You saw a lot of these. But so there are people that have seen these infrequently. There are people who have seen these on a day-to-day basis. When we've spoken with scientists, over the past year or two, and so this is coming out of places that some would see as the scientific establishment, and can we talk about this, can we not? And some of these conversations hadn't taken place as openly. When they did, what we found was when we go into rooms and we talk with people who are innovators, it's usually 30 to 50% of people will share that they've seen or experienced anomalous phenomena. Sometimes they say, oh no, I haven't seen a UAP. And then they say, well, I did see this orb over a football field and, it was huge. And then, so people have seen things, and we've had to have the conversation with leaders in science where we say, by the way, times have changed. There's all this great work that's been done towards disclosure. And when we started talking to people about it, where we might have thought it was 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, seems like it's more like 1 in 3 or 2 in 3 or maybe 3 in 3 and 3. Three people aren't talking about it. And so we've had the conversation, which is, it is not credible or viable to act like this isn't going on. So it's a little, we use the analogy that it's a little bit like whale watching. It's both normal if you live by the coast only, certainly. But if you live by the coast, you have access to get on the water, there's a percentage of people who would have seen whales. There's a percentage who haven't. It's normal both ways, so nothing to feel like, special or not special, regardless, but it's ubiquitous. So if you can't go in front of a room of people, if you've seen that and it's credible, and if you haven't seen it, we say, listen, people are seeing this, they know. So to be credible, you do need to acknowledge it's out there. There's so much data, there's so much people have on their iPhones, there's so many people who will speak to the programs on the high side they're in, but the low side, is not waiting for agreement. They're not, the Fortune 1, the US government can lead this. We can try to figure out what benefit we have from the great work people in this country and perhaps around the world have done, or people are ready to move forward. And when I was in government, I used to receive proposals, without going into the details in any of them, in various fields of technology, where people think they're the only ones who can say, no. Any idea you have, believe me, dozens of people are working at the same time. So this is something that right now, both in this country and around the world, there are so many people that are eager to build this, and a number of them are already building these things up. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it isn't happening all over the place, both in this country and abroad. So if we need to lead, if we want to lead, we need to be active. So I'm looking, we always listen with respect to innovators and entrepreneurs. And I want to thank so many of you for sharing what you've seen. There is an opportunity. I expect more scientists are going to be engaging directly with the phenomena. And as scientists, they're going to be doing experiments and methods. Okay, so if you want to talk about something that people talk even less about than UAPs. So the thing that was even more of a third rail than UAPs is the sources and methods for some of this. So as you're hearing about, there's a number of teams that are working calling this phenomena, and they're talking about all these different things. Some of them have these, ultra exotic protocols. And then one of the groups that we went to visit with some scientists, their protocol was prayer. And it was not some exotic thing, it was the Our Father, the Hail Mary, conversation. And I'm not trying to constrain it to any denomination or any faith or lack thereof, because I think one of the hesitancies people have is they want this to be for everybody and not to be specific or linked with one thing. But sources and methods, when we're talking science, there are people through meditation or very, day-by-day prayer are calling in these craft, and these orbs. So it's science. Let's talk about what it is and then assess it.
Well, thank you. So my first question actually is to you, Anna. So there was a recent statement by a government official, and it kind of went unnoticed. I think it was a few weeks ago, where they said we are now manipulating space-time. We have the ability to manipulate space-time. So I'll let that sink in for a moment. That was an official statement by a U.S. government representative. You can elaborate on that.
Well, there's certainly been publicly visible funding that has gone into that. And I'll say a couple things before I would say there's a much better expert in the audience, Dr. Julia Mossbridge, in terms of space-time work. Also, that's something that Dr. Hal Kutoff with space-time metric engineering has been very active in. So there's been plenty of work on that, and there's a lot that's going on.
So in the backdrop of that, the National Science Foundation has been a fundamental...
Oh, and sorry, just one quick thing to say. But by the way, we also, a few of us were also, maybe several of us in the room, about over a year ago, were on the National Mall at the National Academy of Sciences, where it was National Space Week. And there were some presenters from around the world, and that also included a representative from the Chinese government, presumably the CCP. And the presentation that they were putting up included requests for, we want to work with people on, I believe it was space-time metric engineering, it was gravitational control, and it was also alien life off planet, amongst other things like renewables. So the Chinese are literally coming down to the National Mall and saying, hi, come talk to us about this. And so, come on, seriously? Another thing that they said, by the way, in terms of many of us have been advocating for much higher levels of capital to go into innovation and also into in-space infrastructure, which does not have access to the terrestrial financial tools like debt. So if you buy a house, most people, they're making a smaller down payment, 20%, 5%, whatever they can do, more of a minimum. In space, it's typically, you've got to front all of the money up front. You're not going to build a hospital for the individual patient. You need to have the financial model. So anyways, when I was trying to figure out what was the space budget for China, they wouldn't tell me. But the gentleman did look at me in disdain. He's talking to all of you. He said, when we look at putting up a space station, we view that, does that cost the same amount of money as putting down a couple of kilometers of metro? Basically, we're going to do that all day, every day. So if we can't figure out how to make the investments to win in these transformational markets for abundance, for societal benefits, and for economic growth and gain, we're going to be left behind. So so the people that are moving forward. We really hope that the U.S. government, Fortune 1, is able to share some of the great work that's been done previously across all these fields, but the private sector is moving forward.
Folks, we're going to have time for only two very quick questions. We're already way over our time, and we have to unfortunately surrender this room back over to folks. So let me finish. I've got two here, and then afterwards, if you want to get with our guests, you can. We're not going to have time to open it up right now for public questions, but I have, let me get to this real quick. And if we could, our guests could please keep the answer as succinct as possible before we actually get kicked out of the room. Let me start with you, Anna. The National Science Foundation has been a fundamental pillar of some of America's revolutionary technology and concepts for many decades. How can the NSF help the government now concerning the topic of UAPs?
Well, I guess one of the things that's just publicly visible is that we have been, when I was formerly at NSF, I would just say that there's lots of publicly visible content of us being very forward on the topic, listening to innovators, working with strong colleagues from across the interagency. So I think that NSF has shown, and NSF leadership has also just been extremely supportive. So I just want to be very clear. I left the government because I'm excited about building things in the private sector, and I've only ever received the greatest support and collaboration from my interagency colleagues and from the agencies with which I worked, who are extremely forward on all areas of innovation, but certainly UAP fits within that, including our publicly visible awards that were made to fund UAP science. There's great people that are highly supportive, particularly over there.
Excellent, very encouraging, thank you. Mike, last question. You were on the NASA UAP independent study team. My question for you is, what were the recommendations of the NASA UAP independent study team, and how should those recommendations be implemented?
For the purpose of time, Lou, thank you for that question. I'll focus on two of those recommendations. We already discussed going through the NASA archives with an AI ML system to get the data, just a few examples of which we were able to show today, again, which could be quite extraordinary. Candidly, I think there are companies that would even volunteer to do that work for NASA. But the second one, and I really appreciate you showing that photo, which was taken by a commercial pilot. And one of the great disappointments I had when I was on the UAP independent study team was I was asking the FAA, how many reports have you gotten from commercial pilots? Are those reports being archived? How are we keeping track of that? And I got confusion and no straight answers. And here I'd like to give credit to Brian Graves again for suggesting that we leverage NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS, which has been operating for decades, has hundreds of thousands of cases. And this is a confidential system where pilots, crew can call in about safety anomalies that they've experienced. It's worked phenomenally well. We should be leveraging this system for the reporting of UAP. It can be done quickly, it could be done efficiently, and the amount of data that we will receive would be amazing. Additionally, the images that I showed you was from the Commercial and Payload Services Program. Public-private partnerships have driven all of this. I'm so excited for the democratization of space and the data that we will get from that. This was just one example today. As SpaceX, Blue Origin, Redwire, other companies move forward, all with their own cameras, all with their own systems, we're going to get a lot more data. But NASA still holds on to a lot of it. So, for example, with what I presented, we need the raw data. We need timestamps. We need data in a format where we can do true academic research. So if we were just to do those two things, and again, we can use support from Congress, I think, to push that, I think NASA could play a tremendously important role, and particularly the aviation community and the commercial space community. The amount of data we get, I think, will completely shift the level of sophistication on this topic.
And I think there's also probably about 20 or 30 hours of some of that forward interagency content in the Space Disruptors Day and the Ecosystemic Futures podcast, which we have Diane in the room here today. So thank you, Diane, for helping get that information out broadly.
I do have to say, though, I'm a little less optimistic than Hannah relative to the adoption in government. As I said during my testimony, that particularly academic members of the NASA UAP independent study team were threatened, outright threatened, not for saying UAP are real, but for just having the temerity of even reviewing the topic. You can't do science in that environment. And part of the reason that I'm calling for Congress to help is there's still a great deal of skepticism, even just at NASA, and careers that get ended just for having, again, the temerity to research for it. So I think it's incumbent of all of us to push for real science, objective science, overcome that stigma. Let's get to the data because our economy and our national security may be depending on it.
And I think you contributed so much. So what I would say is some of the things that you experience, or that Lou, and Chris and others experience, there's that body of having been able to point to those leaders. So we had the advantage of being able to point to your study, into this prior work. So, and again, I think there's the opportunity for the government, but I would say that it's not, there are industries that move forward that are not forwarded by the government. But I think just to be something very important that came out, because sometimes if we say, oh, UAP this, UAP that, there's going to be some great technologies that come out of that. That is very fluffy, and who cares? So I think something that I got briefed on in an unclassified, just informal, no classification level environment, and both in personal capacity, but then I later brought that person in to brief others in the agency. Is there real and meaningful technologies that have come from these programs? And I think with a lot of this information, you're going to see that the story about it has been in the internet for decades, perhaps. So what I have, though, on from a very credible source was that, yes, there are people who say that this came out of the UAP programs, and we talk about lasers and semiconductors. And that was so important. Semiconductors, the top 10 companies today, a $6.5 trillion industry that we all benefit from and underpins our global economy. That is something that it's not just, oh, maybe we'll get something. It's that there are tremendous people who have built things, both in classified and unclassified environments. And that's been, put out by so many authors and people in the news, but some ones are in environments that we can say this is taken seriously, and those people have told the government that yes, there's been real advantage on some of these most important core technologies from coming from crash retrievals.
And I think to get the government to take it seriously, we need to engage the public. We've got to get outside the UAP bubble. And Dan Farrow did a tremendous movie, Age of Disclosure. It's really a blue story in many ways. It's extraordinary. Himself and Jay Stratton. If we can touch the public, if we can get them engaged, if we can get them the same information that we just saw, I think that would be completely transformative.
Well, since time is of the essence, first of all, thank you sincerely for your participation. It was a fantastic conversation. Let me leave a couple thoughts here, if I may, before we say final farewell. One of the recommendations we made to Congress is the generation of a national intelligence strategy that would be promulgated on an annual basis, just like we do for other hard targets. It's a system that we have perfected already. And then right on the heels of that, a national strategy every year, annual strategy on UAP drone. Basically, any unattributed objects that are in our skies, we should have a strategy for it, because we're seeing both on the combat field and even in the streets of New York, we're seeing technologies that we can't really explain, and frankly could be used against us in a very nefarious way if we don't get a handle on it. Two, what I'd like to do is propose, and hopefully Congress at some point will be open to this, that we should do a forum like this every year for the American public and for the media, and allow Congress to get to the bottom of things and ask the questions that they normally wouldn't be able to ask, and bring in the Department of Justice and the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and bring them all here. Why not? Right? Sitting down here in front of the American people, by the way I look at it, you're paying their paychecks anyways, right? They kind of owe you some answers, and they owe Congress some answers. I would also say, please let your members of Congress know that you support this. If you like what Representative Burleson and Representative Luna and Burchett and others have done here today, let them know, right? They need to hear this. And so other members of Congress can see this and say, hey, that works, right? Tell them that. They need to hear that feedback, unless you don't want one of these again. But that would be my suggestion. Last but not least, I want to thank specifically our members of Congress, because at the end of the day, they're your representatives. They represent this country. They are very much part of this country. And they are the reasons why you are all here today and we are here. They have facilitated this, they have sponsored this, they have gone out of their way to put their political careers potentially in jeopardy for even having this conversation for you. So if you appreciate this, let them know. Last but not least, thank you to every one of you. Again, our friends in the media, the folks that came over here, some cases came from across the world and traveled here very long distances to be with us here today. Thank you very much. It's very meaningful, and we're all here because it's been a group effort. So with that said, let's give a round of applause to our guests here. And a huge round of applause for what those who do talk about. We are happy to be able to take us out of this room. So with no further ado, this meeting is now.
Great. The new GoDaddy Arrow.
And that was it. I guess some interesting things there from Gold and the other witness. I've been constantly searching for a possible location of this photo that Elizondo held up. Again, in case you missed it on our Twitter at @unexplained, we kind of got to the bottom of the code at the top, the FL210 near Four Corners. This probably stands for flight level 210, which would be 21,000 feet. So the object was either at 21,000 feet or the platform that took the photo was at 21,000 feet. And then near Four Corners, this is most likely referring to the Four Corners area where New Mexico borders 3 other states. So I've been looking. There's some interesting potential matches. I just found a potential matchup of some shapes. What is interesting about the matchup, I just found it doesn't have a circle on there or 2 circles. So there are some on Twitter speculating that the photograph could be nothing more than field circles or field crops. So not a shadow. And there are photos online that show circular dark patches and circular lighter patches of crop fields. And it certainly could be misinterpreted as an object casting a shadow. And there's some online that says the shadow's all wrong and everything. I don't know about that. But interestingly, Gold himself just said, hey, I appreciate you showing that photo from a commercial pilot. You would think that someone with Gold's expertise, or the lady next to him, Estevez, I think, you would think if that photo set off alarm bells or red flags that they would have picked up on it. But Gold doubled down and said, hey, I appreciate you showing that photo from a commercial pilot. So very interesting there. We'll try to come back on another time. Maybe you can catch me in some Twitter spaces going over some analysis and further thoughts. Until then, I've got sand volleyball tonight, and I'm about to have to pick some kids up from school. And this has been a long day of listening to some UFO stuff. So very interesting. Thanks to everybody for joining us from all over the world. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're at All Things Unexplained. You know, Vetted Podcast, our friends at Vetted, they just picked up one of our tweets recently on Roswell, a Roswell revelation that we picked up from the National Archives release. And they kind of based an episode of their podcast off our tweet about Roswell and some audio that we found in the National Archives. So check that out. Give us a follow on Twitter if you will. If you'd like to support the show, you can also check out our YouTube store. We've got super chat, super stickers, super thanks available, and check out our website at allthingsunexplained.com. I am Dr. Mounce. This is All Things Unexplained. I want to encourage each of you to get off your screens now for a little while. Head outside, get some fresh air, get some sunshine, get out to the woods. Watch the sky for yourselves. Don't count on other people to tell you what's out there. You might not find Bigfoot, you might not find a UFO, but you might find something even more important out there. You might just find yourself. Thanks, everybody.
All Things Unexplained.
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, will save for closed session.